So we come to chapter 35 of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. To make sure you don't lose the thread of the story, let me remind you of how matters stood at the end of chapter 34. Nicholas' uncle Ralph had just finished a conversation with Wackford Squeers, the proprietor of the infamous school in Yorkshire, Dotheboys Hall. Both Ralph and Squeers were keen to revenge themselves on Nicholas. Squeers was still nursing his bruises after the beating Nicholas had given him for his cruelty to the boys. Ralph was smouldering with rage after receiving a letter from Nicholas. It was a complete rejection of his uncle and his unwilling, meagre help. Nicholas tells him face to face that he is a scoundrel and that he intends to cut off all family contact with him once and for all. And the letter ends with these words. Nicholas writing to his uncle. You are an old man, and I leave you to the grave. May every recollection of your life cling to your false heart and cast their darkness on your deathbed. Dickens paints Ralph Nickleby, Nicholas's uncle, as a villain. There's no doubt about that. But he leaves a lingering trail of something which might just give us a tiny scrap of sympathy with him. Ralph hates Nicholas like poison. But in contrast, he feels quite warm towards Nicholas' sister, Kate. After he's read Nicholas's letter, conflicting thoughts pass through his mind. He hates Nicholas because he is young and open-hearted, and this reminds him of the way he despised his own brother, Nicholas' father, when they were boys together. They were so unalike. Nicholas' father, like his son, was open, liberal, gallant, and cheerful. That's Dickens' description of him. Ralph was the opposite. And he wonders if this is why people have always disliked him. That is, until they wanted to borrow some money from him. Well, whatever the truth of that, this is how chapter 34 ends. In exact proportion as Ralph Nickleby became conscious of a struggling and lingering regard for Kate, had his detestation of Nicholas increased. It might be that to atone for the weakness of inclining to any one person, he held it necessary to hate some other more intensely than before. But such had been the course of his feelings, and now to be defied and spurned by his nephew, to be held up to his niece in the worst and most repulsive colours, to know that she was taught to hate and despise him, to feel that there was an infection in his touch and taint in his companionship, to know all this, and to know that the mover of it all was the same boyish, poor relation who had twitted him in their first interview and openly bearded and braved him ever since. This wrought his quiet and stealthy malignity to such a pitch that there was scarcely anything he would not have hazarded to gratify it if he could have seen his way to some immediate retaliation. But fortunately for Nicholas, Ralph Nickleby did not. And although he cast about all that day and kept a corner of his brain working on the one anxious subject through all the round of schemes and business that came with it, night found him at last still harping on the same theme and still pursuing the same unprofitable reflections. "When my brother was such as he," said Ralph, "the first comparisons were drawn between us, always in my disfavour. He was open, liberal, gallant, and cheerful. I, a crafty hunks of cold and stagnant blood, with no passion but love of saving, and no spirit beyond a thirst for gain. I recollected it well when I first saw this whipster." He means Nicholas. "But I remember it better now." He had been occupied in tearing Nicholas' letter into atoms as he spoke, and he scattered it in a tiny shower all about him. "Recollections like these," pursued Ralph with a bitter smile, "flock upon me, when I resign myself to them in crowds and from countless quarters. As a portion of the world affect to despise the power of money, I must try and show them what it is." And being by this time in a pleasant frame of mind for slumber, Ralph Nickleby went to bed. Chapter 35. Having established his mother and sister in the apartments of the kind-hearted miniature painter Miss Nickleby, and ascertained that Sir Mulberry Hawk was in no danger of losing his life, Nicholas turned his thoughts to poor Smike, who, after breakfasting with Newman Noggs, had remained in a disconsolate state at that worthy creature's lodgings, waiting with much anxiety for further intelligence of his protector. "As he will be one of our own little household wherever we live and whatever fortune is in reserve for us," thought Nicholas, "I must present the poor fellow in due form. They will be kind to him for his own sake, and if not on that account solely, to the full extent I could wish, they will stretch a point, I am sure, for my sake." Nicholas said "they," but his misgivings were confined to one person. He was sure of Kate, but he knew his mother's peculiarities and was not quite so certain that Smike would find favour in the eyes of Mrs. Nickleby. "However," thought Nicholas as he departed on his benevolent errand, "she cannot fail to become attached to him when she knows what a devoted creature he is, and as she must quickly find the discovery, his probation will be a short one." "I was afraid," said Smike, overjoyed to see his friend again, "that you had fallen into some fresh trouble. The time seemed so long. At last I almost feared you were lost." "Lost!" replied Nicholas gaily. "You will not be rid of me so easily, I promise you. I shall rise to the surface many thousand times yet, and the harder the thrust that pushes me down, the more quickly I shall rise. But come, Smike, my errand here is to take you home." "Home?" faltered Smike, drawing timidly back. "Ay," rejoined Nicholas, taking his arm, "and why not?" I had such hopes once," said Smike. Day and night for many years, I longed for home till I was weary,
and pined away with grief. But now—"
"And what now?" asked Nicholas, looking kindly into his face. "What now, old friend?"
I could not part from you to go to any home on earth," replied Smike, pressing his hand, "except one. Except one. I know I shall never be an old man, and if your hand placed me in the grave, and I could think before I died that you would come and look upon it sometimes with one of your kind smiles, and in the summer weather when everything is alive, not dead like me, I could go to that home almost without a tear." "Why do you talk thus, poor boy, if your life is a happy one with me?" asked Nicholas. "Because I should change, not those about me, and if they forgot me, I should never know it," replied Smike. "In the churchyard we are all alike, but here there are none like me. I am a poor creature, but I know that."
"You are a foolish, silly creature," said Nicholas cheerfully. "If that is what you mean, I grant you that. Why, here's a dismal face for ladies' company. My pretty sister, too, whom you've so often asked me about. Is this your Yorkshire gallantry? For shame! For shame!" Smike brightened and smiled. "When I talk of homes," pursued Nicholas, "I think of mine, which is yours, of course. If it were defined by any particular four walls and a roof, God knows I should be sufficiently puzzled to say whereabouts it lay. But that is not what I mean. When I speak of home, I speak of the place where, in default of a better, those I love are gathered together. And if that place were a gypsy's tent or a barn, I should call it by the same good name notwithstanding. And now for what is my present home, which, however alarming your expectations may be, will neither terrify you by its extent nor its magnificence." So saying, Nicholas took his companion by the arm, and saying a great deal more to the same purpose, and pointing out various things to amuse and interest him as they went along, led the way to Miss La Creevy's house. "And this, Kate," said Nicholas, entering the room where his sister sat alone, "this is the faithful friend and affectionate fellow traveller whom I prepared you to receive." Poor Smike was bashful and awkward and frightened enough at first, but Kate advanced towards him so kindly, and said in such a sweet tender voice how anxious she had been to see him after all her brother had told her, and how much she had to thank him for having comforted Nicholas so greatly in his very trying reverses, that he became very doubtful whether he should shed tears or not, and he became still more flurried. However, he managed to say in a broken voice that Nicholas was his only friend, and that he would lay down his life to help him. And Kate, although she was so kind and considerate, seemed to be so wholly unconscious of his distress and embarrassment that he recovered almost immediately and felt at home. At length the door opened again, and a lady in mourning dress came in. Nicholas, kissing the lady in mourning affectionately and calling her mother, led her towards the chair from which Smike had recently risen when she entered the room. "You are always kind-hearted and anxious to help the oppressed, my dear mother," said Nicholas, "so you will be favourably disposed towards him, I know. I know, and I am sure you know, my dear Nicholas, replied Mrs. Nickleby, looking very hard at her new friend and bending to him with something more of majesty than the occasion seemed to require. I am sure that any friend of yours has, as indeed he naturally ought to have, and must have, of course, you know, must have a great claim upon me. And of course it is a very great pleasure to me to be introduced to anybody in whom you take an interest. There can be no doubt about it, none at all, not the least in the world, said Mrs. Nickleby. At the same time, I must say, Nicholas, my dear, as I used to say to your poor papa, when he would bring gentlemen home to dinner and there was nothing in the house, that if he had come the day before yesterday, no, I don't mean the day before yesterday, I should have said perhaps the year before last, we should have been better able to entertain him. With remarks such as these, Mrs. Nickleby turned to her daughter and inquired in an audible whisper whether the gentleman was going to stop all night. Because if he is, Kate, my dear, said Mrs. Nickleby, I don't see that it's possible for him to sleep anywhere, and that's the truth. Kate stepped gracefully forward and, without any show of annoyance or irritation, breathed a few words into her mother's ear. Oh, la, my dear, said Mrs. Nickleby, shrinking back, how you do tickle one! Of course I understand that, my love, without your telling me, and I said the same to Nicholas, and I am very, very much pleased. You didn't tell me, Nicholas, my dear, added Mrs. Nickleby, turning round with an air of less reserve than she had before assumed. You didn't tell me what your friend's name is. His name, mother, replied Nicholas, is Smike. The effect of this communication was by no means anticipated, but the name was no sooner pronounced than Mrs. Nickleby dropped into a chair and burst into a fit of crying. What is the matter? Exclaimed Nicholas, running to support her. Oh, it is so like Pike, cried Mrs. Nickleby. So exactly like that horrible man, Pike. Oh, don't speak to me. I shall be better presently. After exhibiting every symptom of slow suffocation in all its stages, and drinking about a teaspoonful of water from a full tumbler and spilling the remainder, Mrs. Nickleby was better, and remarked with a feeble smile that she was very, very foolish. But they knew. Mr. Smike is from Yorkshire, Nicholas, my dear, said Mrs. Nickleby after dinner, and when she had been silent for some time. Certainly, mother, replied Nicholas. I see you have not forgotten his melancholy history. Oh, no, cried Mrs. Nickleby. Ah, melancholy indeed. You don't happen, Mr. Smike, ever to have dined with the Grimbles of Grimble Hall, somewhere in the North Riding, do you? Said the good lady, addressing herself to him. A very proud man, Sir Thomas Grimble, with 6 grown-up and most lovely daughters, and the finest park in the country. My dear mother, reasoned Nicholas, do you suppose that the unfortunate outcast of a Yorkshire school is likely to receive many cards of invitation from the nobility and gentry in the neighbourhood? Really, my dear, I don't know why it should be so very extraordinary, said Mrs. Nickleby. I know that when I was at school I always went at least twice every half a year to the Hawkinses of Taunton Vale, and they are very much richer than the Grimbles, and connected with them in marriage. So you see it's not so very unlikely after all. Having put down Nicholas with this triumphant manner, Mrs. Nickleby was suddenly seized with a forgetfulness of Smike's real name, and with an irresistible tendency to call him Mr. Slammons, which circumstance she attributed to the remarkable similarity of the two names in point of sound, both beginning with an S and moreover being spelt with an M. But whatever doubt there may be on this count, there was none to his being a most excellent listener, which circumstance had induced Mrs. Nickleby to express the highest opinion of his general deportment and disposition. Thus the little circle remained on the most amicable and agreeable footing until Monday morning, when Nicholas withdrew himself from it for a short time, seriously to reflect upon the state of his affairs, and to determine, if he could, upon some course of life which would enable him to support those who were so entirely dependent upon his exertions. Mr. Crummles, the theatre manager, occurred to him more than once. But although Kate was acquainted with the whole history of his connection with that gentleman, his mother was not, and he foresaw 1,000 fretful objections on her part to his seeking a livelihood upon the stage. There were graver reasons, too, against his returning to that mode of life, independently of those arising out of its spare and precarious earnings, and his own internal conviction that he could never hope to aspire to any great distinction, even as a provincial actor. How could he carry his sister from town to town and place to place, and debarred her from any other associates than those with whom he would be compelled, almost without distinction, to mingle? No, it won't do, said Nicholas, shaking his head. I must try something else. It was with much ease that he made the resolution to carry this into effect, and with no greater experience of the world than he had acquired for himself in his short trials, with a sufficient share of headlong rashness and precipitation, qualities not altogether unnatural at his time of life, with a very slender stock of money and still more scanty stock of friends, what could he do? Egad, said Nicholas, I'll try that register office again. The office looked just the same as when he'd left it last, and indeed, with one or two exceptions, there seemed to be the very same placards in the window that he had seen before. There were the same unimpeachable masters and mistresses in want of virtuous servants, and the same virtuous servants in want of unimpeachable masters and mistresses. As Nicholas stopped to look in at the window, an old gentleman happened to stop too. Nicholas, carrying his eye along the window panes from left to right in search of some capital text card which should be applicable to his own case, caught sight of this old gentleman's figure and instinctively withdrew his eyes from the window to observe the old gentleman more closely. He was a sturdy old fellow in a broad-skirted blue coat, made pretty large to fit easily, with no particular waist, his bulky legs clothed in drab breeches, and his high gaiters, and his head protected by a low-crowned, broad-brimmed white hat, such as a wealthy grazier might wear. He wore his coat buttoned, and his dimpled double chin rested in the folds of a white neckerchief, not one of your stiff-necked apoplectic cravats, but a good, easy, old-fashioned white neckcloth, that a man might go to bed in and be none the worse for. But what principally attracted the attention of Nicholas was the old gentleman's eye. He had never seen such a clear, twinkling, honest, merry eye as that. And there he stood, looking a little upward with one hand thrust into the breast of his coat, and the other playing with his old-fashioned gold watch chain, his head thrown a little to one side and his hat a little more to one side than his head. But that was evidently accident, not his ordinary way of wearing it. With such a pleasant smile playing around his mouth, and such a comical expression of mingled slyness, simplicity, kind-heartedness, and good humour lighting up his jolly old face, that Nicholas would have been content to have stood there and looked at him until evening, and to have forgotten meanwhile that there was such a thing as a soured mind or a crabbed countenance to be met in the whole world. But even a very remote approach to this gratification was not to be made. For although he seemed quite unconscious of having been held subject of observation, the old gentleman looked casually at Nicholas, and the latter, fearful of giving offence, resumed his scrutiny of the window instantly. Still the old gentleman stood there, glancing from placard to placard, and Nicholas couldn't forbear raising his eyes to his face again. Grafted upon the quaintness and oddity of his appearance was something so indescribably engaging, and bespeaking so much worth, and there were so many little lights hovering about the corners of his mouth and eyes, that it was not a mere amusement, but a positive pleasure and delight to look at him. This being the case, it was no wonder that the old gentleman caught Nicholas in the fact more than once. At such time Nicholas coloured and looked embarrassed, for the truth is that he had begun to wonder whether the stranger could, by any possibility, be looking for a clerk or secretary, and thinking this, he felt as if the old gentleman must know it. Long as all this takes to tell, it wasn't more than a couple of minutes in passing. As the stranger was moving away, Nicholas caught his eye again, and in the awkwardness of that moment stammered out an apology. "No offence, no offence," said the old man. This was said in such a hearty tone, and the voice was so exactly what it should have been from such a speaker, and there was such a cordiality in the manner, that Nicholas was emboldened to speak again. "A great many opportunities here, sir," he said, half smiling, as he motioned towards the window.
"Yes, a great many opportunities here, sir. A great many opportunities, and a great many willing and anxious to be employed, seriously thought so very often, I dare say," replied the old man. "Poor fellows, poor fellows."
He moved away as he said this, but seeing that Nicholas was about to speak, good-naturedly slackened his pace, as if he were unwilling to cut him short. After a little of that hesitation which may sometimes be observed between two people in the street who have exchanged a nod and are both uncertain whether they should turn back and speak or not, Nicholas found himself at the old man's side.
"You were going to speak, young gentleman. What were you going to say?"
"Merely that I almost hoped, I mean to say thought, you might had the same objection in consulting these advertisements," said Nicholas.
"Hi, hi! What object would that be? What object?" returned the old gentleman, looking slyly at Nicholas. "Did you think I wanted a situation, eh? Oh, did you think that?" Nicholas shook his head. "Ho, ho, ho!
laughed the old gentleman, rubbing his hands and wrists as if he was washing them. "A very natural thought at all events, after seeing me gazing at those placards. But I thought the same of you at first, upon my word I did. I thought you were looking for a situation."
"If you had thought of that, you would have not been far from the truth," rejoined Nicholas.
"Oh!" cried the old man, surveying him from head to foot. Dear me, dear me. No, no. A well-behaved young gentleman reduced to such a necessity? No, no, no."
Nicholas bowed, and bidding him good morning, turned upon his heel.
"Stay!"
said the old man, beckoning him into a by-street where they could converse with less interruption.
"What do you mean? Tell me."
"Merely," replied Nicholas, "that your kind face and manner, both unlike any I have ever seen, tempted me into an avowal which, to any other stranger in this wilderness of London, I should not have been dreaming of making," returned Nicholas.
"Wilderness? Yes, it is. Good, it is a wilderness," said the old man with much animation. "It is a wilderness, and it was a wilderness to me once. I came here barefoot. I've never forgotten that, thank God."
He raised his hat from his head and looked very grave.
"Now, tell me, young gentleman, tell me what the matter is. What is it, and how did it come about?"
The old gentleman laid his hand on Nicholas' shoulder and walked him up the street. "You're laying his finger on the sleeve of Nicholas' black coat. You're in mourning, aren't you? Who's it for?" "My father," replied Nicholas. "Ah," said the old gentleman quickly. "Bad thing for a young man to lose his father. Widowed mother, I suppose." Nicholas sighed. And do you think you got brothers and sisters too, eh?" "One sister," rejoined Nicholas.
Poor thing, poor thing. You're a scholar too, I dare say,"
said the old man, looking wistfully into the face of the young one. "I have been tolerably well educated," said Nicholas.
"Fine thing," said the old gentleman. "Education, it's a fine thing, a very great thing. I never had any. I admire it in much more in others. It's a very, very fine thing. Yes, yes. Now, tell me more of your history. Let me hear it all. I don't mean impertinent curiosity. No, no, no. But tell me the whole story."
There was something so engaging and earnest and guileless in the way in which all this was said, and such a complete disregard of all the conventional restraints and coldness, that Nicholas could not resist it. Among men who have any sound and sterling qualities, there is nothing so contagious as pure openness of heart. Nicholas took the infection instantly and ran over the main points of his little history without reserve, merely suppressing some names, and touching as lightly as possible upon his uncle's treatment, especially his treatment of Kate. The old man listened with great attention. When he had concluded, he drew Nicholas' arm eagerly through his own. "Don't say another word, not another word," said he. "You come along with me. We mustn't lose a minute." So saying, the old gentleman dragged him back into Oxford Street, and hailing an omnibus on its way into the city, pushed Nicholas inside before him and followed himself.
As he appeared in a most extraordinary condition of restless excitement, and whenever Nicholas offered to speak, immediately interposed with, "Don't say another word, my dear sir, not on any account, not another word," the young gentleman thought it better to attempt no further interruption. Into the city they went without interchanging any conversation, and the farther they went, the more Nicholas wondered what the end of this adventure could possibly be. The old gentleman got out with great alacrity when they had reached the bank, and once more taking Nicholas by the arm, hurried him along. They went through Threadneedle Street, and through some lanes and passages on the right, until they reached at length a quiet, shady little square. Into the oldest and cleanest looking house of business in the square the old gentleman led the way. The only inscription on the doorpost was, "Cheeryble Brothers," but from a hasty glance at the directions of some packages which were lying about, Nicholas supposed that the brothers Cheeryble were merchants. Passing through a warehouse which presented every indication of a thriving business, Mr. Cheeryble, for such Nicholas supposed him to be from the respect he had been shown by the warehousemen and porters whom they passed, led him into a little partitioned office counting-house, like a large glass case, in which counting-house there sat, as free from dust and blemish as if he'd been fixed there into the glass case before the top was put on, and had never ever come out since then. A fat, elderly, large-faced clerk with spotless spectacles and a powdered head. "Is my brother in his room, Tom?" said Mr. Cheeryble, with no less kindness of manner than he had shown to Nicholas.
Yes, sir, he is,"
replied the fat clerk, turning his spectacles towards his principal and his eyes towards Nicholas.
But Mr. Trimmers is with him."
"Oh, and what's he come about then, Tim?" said Mr. Cheeryble.
He's putting up a subscription for the widow and family of the man who was killed in the East India Docks road this morning, sir,"
rejoined Tim.
"Do you know how he died? He was smashed, sir, by a cask of sugar."
"Trimmers is a good creature," said Mr. Cheeryble with great earnestness. "He's a kind soul. I'm very much obliged to Trimmers. Trimmers is one of the best friends we had. He makes 1,000 cases known to us that we should never discover ourselves. I'm very much obliged to Trimmers." Saying which, Mr. Cheeryble rubbed his hands with infinite delight, and Mr. Trimmers, happening to pass the door at that very instant on the way out, shot out after him and caught him by the hand. "I owe you 1,000 thanks, Trimmers, 10,000 thanks. I take it very friendly of you, very friendly indeed," said Mr. Cheeryble, dragging him back into a corner to get out of hearing. "How many children are there in this family, the family of the man who was killed? How many children? And what has my brother Ned given, Trimmers?"
"There are 6 children," replied the gentleman, "and your brother has given £20.
"My brother is a good fellow, and you're a good fellow too, Trimmers," said the old man, shaking them by both hands with tremendous eagerness. "Put me down for another 20. Well, no, stop a minute. We mustn't look too ostentatious. Put me down £10, and Tim Linkinwater £10. A cheque for £20 for Mr. Trimmers, Tim." "God bless you, Trimmers, and come and dine with us one day this week. You'll always find a knife and fork, and we shall be delighted. Now, my dear sir, a cheque from Mr. Linkinwater, Tim." "Smashed by a cask of sugar.
and 6 poor children. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Talking on in this strain as fast as he could to prevent any friendly remonstrances from the collector of the subscriptions on the large amount of his donation, Mr. Cheeryble led Nicholas, equally astonished and affected by what he'd seen and heard in this short space, to the half-opened door of another room. "Brother Ned," said Mr. Cheeryble, rapping with his knuckles and stooping to listen, "are you busy, my dear brother, or can you spare a word or two with me?" "Brother Charles, my dear fellow," replied a voice from inside, so alike in its tones to that which had just spoken that Nicholas started and almost thought it was the same. "Don't ask me such a question, but come in directly." They went in without further parley. What was the amazement of Nicholas when his conductor advanced and exchanged a warm greeting with another old gentleman, the very type and model of himself, the same face, the same figure, the same coat, waistcoat, and neckcloth, the same breeches and gaiters, nay, there was the very same white hat hanging against the wall. As they shook each other by hand, the face of each lighted up with beaming looks of affection. These would have been most delightful to behold in infants, and which, in men so old, were inexpressibly touching. Nicholas could observe that the old gentleman was somewhat stouter than his brother. This, and a slight additional shade in clumsiness in his gait and stature, formed the only perceptible difference between them. Nobody could have doubted their being twin brothers. "It is enough, my dear brother, that you should say we should assist this young gentleman." "Yes, brother Ned, yes," said Nicholas' friend, closing the room door. "Here is a young friend of mine whom we must assist. We must make proper inquiries into his statements in justice to him as well as to ourselves, and if they are confirmed, as I feel assured they will be, we must assist him. We must assist him." "Oh, my dear brother!" "As you say," returned the other. "No further inquiries may be needed. He shall be assisted. What are his necessities, and what does he require? Where is Tim Linkinwater? Let us have him in here." Both the brothers, it may be remarked, had a very empathetic and earnest delivery. Both had lost nearly the same teeth, which imparted some peculiarity to their speech, and both of them spoke as if possessing the utmost serenity of mind that the kindest and most unsuspecting nature could bestow. They had, in collecting the plums from Fortune's choicest pudding, retained a few for present use and kept them in their mouths. "Where is Tom Linkinwater?" said brother Ned. Stop, said brother Charles, taking the other aside. "I have a plan, my dear brother, I have a plan. Tim, our clerk, is getting old. Now, he's been a faithful servant, brother Ned, and I don't think pensioning Tim's mother and sister and buying them a little tomb for the family when this poor brother died. No. I don't think it's half enough. Not half," said the other. "If we could lighten Tim's duties," said the old gentleman, "and prevail upon him to go into the country now and then and sleep in the fresh air 2 or 3 times a week, which he could if he begun his business an hour later in the morning, old Tim Linkinwater would grow again young in time. And he's got 3 good years our senior now. Old Tim Linkinwater
young again! Ho, 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 brother Ned! Why, I recollect old Tim Linkinwater quite a little boy, don't you? Ha, ha, ho, ho! Poor Tim, poor Tim! The fine old fellows laughed pleasantly together, each with a tear in regard for old Tim Linkinwater standing in his eye. But hear this first, brother Ned, said the old man, hastily placing 2 chairs, one each side of Nicholas. I'll tell you his story myself, because the young gentleman is modest and he is a scholar, and I shouldn't feel it at all right if he told us his story over and over and over again as if he was a beggar, or as if we doubted him. No, no, no. No, 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 returned the other, nodded his head gravely. Very right, my dear brother, very right. He will tell me if I'm wrong, if I make a mistake, said Nicholas's friend. But whether I do or not, you will be very much affected, dear brother, remembering the time when we were 2 friendless lads and earned our first shilling in this great city. The twins pressed each other's hands in silence, and in his own homely manner, brother Charles related the particulars he had heard from Nicholas. The conversation which ensued was a long one, and when it was over, a secret conference of most equal duration took place between brother Ned and brother Tim and Tim Linkinwater in the next room. It is no disparagement to Nicholas to say that before he had been closeted with the 2 brothers 10 minutes, he could hardly wave his hand